Hello, everybody. I'm here joined once again by Alex Dean, my good friend and BK Hobbies team pilot. And this is a continuation of the previous video we did where we talked about how to set up your first model on your TX16S from Radio Master with EdgeTX and Rotor Flight. So, what do you think, Alex? You ready to do this?
Yeah, let's show people how to just set the model up from scratch.
All right. All right. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to change over to my transmitter right here. Going to power it on. And as we talked in the past, how to flash your radio, make sure you flash it. Make sure you bind your receiver, of course. Make sure you have rotor flight configurator installed on your computer. Anyway, as you power up, you're going to get an error. You can simply skip to get out of that screen and go back to the main menu. So a couple of things I want to bring up very quickly. So there's a setting, if you go to SYS, SYS, there's a setting right here under the hardware tab called ADC filter. It was brought to my attention by a YouTuber that made a comment on our previous video that ADC filter should be turned off. And he's absolutely right. I forgot to mention that in the past. This is a filter that smooths out the response, the analog response of the servo or the devices. It's very useful if you have an airplane that has control surfaces that is perhaps subject to some kind of fluttering, especially around center stick and so forth. If you're using a flight controller, if you're flying a drone, you're flying a helicopter, you have rotor flight, whether it is Nexus or Fly Dragon, you should turn that off. Now, this is a global option. This turns it off for all your models. We're going to get to how to turn it off per model because if you're a guy that has helicopters and planes, you might want to have this ADC filter turned on your airplanes. I think that's really all I had to say about this. Make sure your internal RF here under the hardware is set to CRSF and the baud rate 1.87M. And I think that's all we got right there. Remember to calibrate. We talked about that previously. Anyway, every time you're moving around the screen, you hit this button, it takes you back to the main screen. If you're inside a Lua, which we'll get to in a minute, you have to hit it and hold it to get back to the main screen. But anyway, create the first model. What we're going to do is we're going to hit the model button. Sorry, we're going to hit the center of the scroller here. And then that's basically opens up a menu. You go to manage models. That's the wrong one. Here, manage models. And then I'm going to hit new. And then I'm going to start a new model. And it's going to be a blank model. Depending on the firmware and the different options you have on your transmitter, you might have different options going on here. Some of these are favorite folders or whatever you call it. We want blank. And then I was asked also, so once you hit that, you're in the new model now. It's already created.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
underneath your system settings, you need to make sure you go to that gear and go down to the bottom and that your mode is in mode 2 and not mode 1. Sometimes it'll start in mode 1.
That's a good point. So when you first get the radio, and I don't know if that was my mistake in the past and I failed to check it, but it's under SYS again, and I believe it's, no,
Gear, it's on the gear.
yeah, it's under that gear, which is system settings. And if you scroll all the way down, not too fast so you don't scroll over the top again like I just did. Mode, you want to make sure is 2, mode 2, meaning the left stick is your rudder and your throttle. So make sure that's there because I failed to see that after a firmware update, and Alex and I just wasted about 30 minutes trying to figure out why the channel wasn't working right.
We
So we're still
did.
newbies trying to help newbies. So I love it. It's great. It's great. Anyway, let's go back. So you go to MDL, that's your model. So as I was talking about the filters, there's a way to disable that somewhere in here, right there. ADC filter is set to global. If you're a guy that flies planes and helis, you might want that ADC filter to be set to say off for your helis and set to on for your planes and ignore the global setting. So that's important to know. Then of course here you can name your model. I'm just going to go ahead and call it test. Um,
For reference, we use the same model for every, like I don't change models in my radio for every electric. It's just,
Correct.
I
Good
have
point.
those.
Yeah, great point. Because some people don't understand that. And yes, you can use the same model, and we encourage you to use the same model for all your electric helicopters. When it comes to nitro, you kind of need a different model because there's other options and other things that are happening behind the scenes. So you do not want to use the same. But for electrics, absolutely. Just use the same model for every electric heli you have. You just got to make sure that all your receivers are bound, obviously, and good to go, and just use the one model. So once you're done with that, name your model. If you want to add a model image, just pick any model image. As we talked in the past, in the previous video, if you go to SYS and you go to the SD card, the second option here is images. You can access this from your computer by plugging into the top USB-C port, not the bottom, and then you can upload an image to your radio and place it inside this images folder. We don't know what size. You might need to do some research on that. I think they're tiny little images, maybe a couple hundred pixels.
Yeah, I can't remember what. They need to be like a certain pixel size, so just look that up.
But anyway, you pick whatever image you want, if you want one. Again, turn off your ADC filter. And then here you can set up like timers and things like that. Very important, you have to click on internal RF. It by default is turned off. Turn it on to CRSF. And then the status here for the hertz will be based on what you have in your Express LRS Lua, which we talked about on the previous video when we talked about the firmware updates and all that kind of stuff. So once you're done with that, we're pretty much done with that first screen. Second screen is that H, that's for helicopters. I don't think this matters. I haven't played with this, but I don't think it makes any.
Yeah, mine's just off, Bert.
I think the system, I think Rotor Flight ignores this because it's just looking at inputs and mixes, and it doesn't really care. This is more if you're flying like a good old school traditional helicopter with a, flybarred, and you were doing everything from within the radio, but Rotor Flight doesn't care, so you can ignore that. The next screen takes us to the flight modes. Again, same situation here. We don't have to worry about that because Rotor Flight will dictate the flight modes and not the transmitter itself. Then this is where we get to the actual inputs of the transmitter. So one thing I noticed when I got to the input screen was that the channel arrangement was all messed up. And that's because I missed an option in the system setting here under the gear there, and we were over there, so I just fixed that. So you want to make sure, and that's where we went to double check on the mode. You want to make sure that the default channel order is AETR. That's aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder. You can change the arrangement of those channels in the input screen, input menu, but you want to make your life easier. So just make sure you have AETR going on there. So one thing I like to do in the input screen is, and I already did it, you can see here it says COL instead of THR, is I like to rename this channel from THR, the default there, to COL for collective. And the only reason I like to do that is because we want the collective channel to be channel 3. We don't want the throttle to be channel 3. And that is because Rotor Flight has 4 fully proportional channels, and you want your aileron, elevator, collective, and rudder to be there. And the throttle can be moved to another channel. So you don't have to rename it, but I like to do that. Anyway, the very next screen is the most important screen, and this is where everything's going to happen, and it's going to take us 5 minutes to get this model set up through here. So this is called the mixes screen. So in the mixes, we for sure want the aileron to be channel 1, the elevator to be channel 2, the collective to be channel 3. And now you can see how it says COL because we renamed it in the input screen.
Right. If you didn't rename it, then it's going to be throttle.
It's your going to be throttle, which is fine. It doesn't hurt anything. It's just not, I don't know. It makes sense to do it this way. And then as you scroll down, you'll see channel 4 is rudder, and that's all correct. The next thing you do is you're going to create more mixes because you need to create a mix for your safety switch or your arm switch. You need to create a mix for your throttle and for other things. So channel 5 is going to become our safety switch. So we're going to hit the plus sign right here. We're going to select CH5 for channel 5. We're going to give it a name, and you can call it anything you want. I'm going to call it ARM. Yeah, arm or safety or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna call it arm, and then in the source, I'm going to just basically click on this SA switch because this is my arming switch. The minute I do that, you can automatically see how it went to SA. So now you see SA right there. And then we're going to leave that alone for now. I need to make a change to the weight, but I'm going to explain that later and why. But this is good right now. And then we're going to go back, and then we're going to create another mix right here. So go back to the plus button. And now we're going to go to channel 6. And for the name, we're going to call it THRO for throttle. And then, so what we're trying to accomplish with this throttle channel here, channel 6, is the source is going to be the switch that we use for our throttle hold. This is my throttle hold switch. So basically motor off, and that's going to be switch SG. And now for the weight, we're going to go from plus 100 to negative 100. And you can see how right here, the output and the input on the transmitter go that way to the negative side. And that's what you want. That's what's going to kill your throttle when you hit throttle hold. Okay. Then after that, we're going to hit the plus sign one more time. We're going to go to channel 7, and I'm going to name this channel PROF. You can name it anything you want. This is what controls my profiles, and we're going to show you the profiles here in Rotor Flight very shortly. But for the profiles, you can call it banks, you can call it whatever you want. I want the switch I use to control my head speeds, my idle switch or flight mode switch, whatever you want to call it. When you move the switch, it'll detect SC, it's the switch. And that pretty much does it for profiles. So now we're going to do one last one, channel 8. And I'm going to name this one rates. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow me, you can use any switch you want for this. You can share it with another switch, but I like to use this switch right here, switch SB. And so if I select SB, so what this is going to do is this is going to allow me to change the rates on Rotor Flight. So if I want to fly or hand my heli to somebody that wants a helicopter that's more docile with lower flip rates and roll rates and pirouette rates, then I'll switch here, and if I want to do full 3D, I'll go here. Anyway, that's channel 8. So that does it for the mixes. The next screen is outputs. You don't really have to do anything here, but if you really want to be particular about this, you can hit edit and then give these outputs names, and these names show everywhere on the radio. So I'll name channel 1 as aileron, next one is elevator, so I'll name number 2 ELE for elevator, and then I'll name the next one, let me see what the next one is, collective. The next one is rudder, so number 3 will be collective, number 4 will be rudder, and I'm just going to pause the video and get this done. So I renamed pretty much everything in the output screen. Again, you don't have to do this. I'm just kind of picky and OCD with some of these things. Aileron, elevator, collective, rudder, arm, throttle, profile, and rates. And what's cool about this is when you go to the channels monitor, you can see collective, rudder, arm, throttle, profile, and rates. It's all right there. Anyway, if we go back here, we're done with the output screen. Again, you don't have to do this. This is just me. Next screen is curves. Some people like to run curves. I don't feel like there's a need. I do have curves for my nitro machines, but not for my electrics. Next one is global variables. We don't have to touch anything here. Next one is logical switches. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. There's lots of videos on YouTube and social media that show you how to use logical switches for a million different reasons. I do have a couple. I'll probably do a video down the road in the future explaining that. And then the next screen is the special functions. Again, lots that you can do here. We can get into it at some other time, but you really do not need this to go ahead and fly your machine. And the very, very last screen is telemetry. This is where you discover your sensors and you do all that kind of stuff. Again, not worth getting into. I'll do an advanced video about telemetry. I do have a million different telemetry options on my transmitter. We'll get into that at some other time. And that does it for the model creation. Then if you click on model twice again and you go to the channels monitor, make sure everything's reading 0. So like aileron 0, plus 100, minus 100, elevator, minus 100, plus 100, 0. Make sure everything is calibrated. If not, again, go to the system menu, click on that little symbol right there, and then go over here to calibration like I showed you before and go ahead and calibrate. Okay, so finally, I fired up Rotor Flight. I have it hooked up to my Nexus. I'm not going to get, once again, into Rotor Flight right now. There's way too much to learn here, and this would take 3 hours for me to go over. But I highly recommend that you watch Jonas's video. It's an amazing video. He explains things in detail, and it's just a great source of information. And he does a very, very similar setup in terms of how he sets up his radio. But make sure that you calibrate your accelerometer. I wanted to mention that quickly. Again, watch this video. Here in configuration, make sure that your serial RX, whatever it is, receiver with the Nexus, you want to plug it into port A and set this to serial RX. If you have telemetry, I use the DSM port, which is a very easy port to use if you have a hobby wing telemetry cable. I do fly hobby wing, so that makes things really easy for me. And under receiver, make sure that you have AECR1T23. That means the order of the channels. So this is aileron, this is elevator. They call them roll and pitch, which is perfectly acceptable. Collective is channel 3, as we talked about before. And then your rudder is channel 4. Your aux1 is your arm switch, and then you have your throttle. And then aux2 is your profile switch, and aux3 is channel 8, which we assign to the rates. So as I move the sticks here, you can see how the helicopter's moving and the roll is moving. And then as I move the elevator, you can see how the pitch is moving. So I move the collective, you can see how the collective is moving. I am in throttle hold. This switch is all the way back. So you can see how the throttle is at 988 microseconds of center pulse width. And if I move the collective stick, only the collective moves. The throttle does not move. Now, in order to move the throttle, I just exit my my throttle hold switch. And now you see how the throttle has gone up way up here to 100%, right? And if I go to idle 2, or bank 2, nothing changes. Not on the throttle. We'll get to the profiles later. Nothing changes on the throttle. And again, as I go to throttle hold, throttle goes back to negative 12%, which is fine. Then aux2 is going to be the profile. But before we get to that, aux1 is the arming switch. So right now, I am disarmed, and right now I am armed. And this is why I earlier mentioned that here I was going to reverse the arm. I made a comment that I should change that to negative 100 on the weight, and I'll show you why. In Rotor Flight, when you go here to modes, this is how you arm and disarm. So you move these sliders to where you want it to arm, and you see this little red dot. That is where it's not armed, right? You see the arm flag is off. Now, if I move the switch down, it's arming, and you can see the little red dot moving to the right. Well, I don't want it armed here. I want it armed here. So all I have to do is move the weight here under mixes for the arm channel down to negative 100. Now you can see how with the switch up, I am armed, and with the switch down, I am disarmed. let's go to the adjustments. This is where you set the profiles, right? Okay, so my first adjustment here is aux2, and aux2 is my profiles. So I create this white range on both sides, and then I have my profiles from 1 to 3, for example, right? So my profile changes when I move my auto lap switch. 1, 2, 3. And let me save the screen. If I go back to profiles, you can see that I'm in profile 1 with my bank switch all the way away from me. If I move it to the middle, you can see how it changes to profile 2. If I move it towards me, you can see how it changes to profile 3. Okay? Then let's go back to adjustments. Here, the second adjustment, same deal. Just make these things as wide as you can. I have this set to 3, and this is adjusting my rates. And again, as we discussed, rates are on SB. So if I move here, this is rate 1, rate 2, rate 3. I do not like it that way. I like rate 3 to be up. Don't ask me why. That's just me being like me. So I just go here to the rates, and I do the same thing I did before. I change this weight to -100 from +100, right? And look at what happens now. Now with the switch up, I'm in rate profile or rate number 3, and switch in the middle, rate number 2, switch all the way towards me, rate number 1. So if I go here to rates, you can see how I have rate profile 1 here, rate profile 2, rate profile 3. So, of course, a lot more to talk about. This is just some very basic stuff to get you going and kind of clarify some doubts. I had a lot of issues trying to figure this stuff out right here. Okay, one last thing I wanted to point out before we let you go was that when you power up the radio, you get these checks, right? Like we had in the very beginning. And you saw it in the beginning of this video where it says switch warning. Okay, so it's warning us that our switches are incorrect. So if you go to the model menu, there's an option here called pre-start checks. And then what you do is you uncheck. If you don't want any warnings whatsoever, you just make sure that you click and click until all these go away and they become white or just clear, no yellow color in them, right? Also uncheck the throttle state. That's for airplane guys where you don't want it to be plugged in when it's there. I like to have the SA switch down, so I make sure that this is checked down, and I like to have my throttle hold enabled, so I make sure that SG is also towards me, down. And then what that does is when I power on the radio, it'll warn me that those switches are not in the right position. And you know what? It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because you can just bypass this by clicking press any key. But at least as a reminder, hey, you know, arming switch the right way, throttle hold the right way, and now it boots up. It's a lot to teach, but I feel like it's I don't know, it's a basic overview of how to create a model. What do you think, Alex? It's a lot, man.
It is a lot. And we'll
wild.
do another video about your model screen and how to get the telemetry and set all that up separate. But this way, at least you have stuff working and you can get Rotor Flight moving. Because once you get past the radio stage, Rotor Flight's pretty easy. This is the worst part.
Absolutely. And I did post some of my files. They're kind of outdated, but at least the functionality of my radio files is very similar. You can download them from my Facebook page at facebook.com/BirdRC. I highly encourage you, if you do that, I really, really recommend, and you must, without a shadow of a doubt, go over your servo screen, because you're going to have to adjust your centers right here, okay? You're going to have to go over your mixer, and you're going to have to review all these values and all these values. And then you're going to have to make sure your arming and disarming is working, that your profiles are switching.
We're going to get through this. We haven't decided if we're going to do one video on the entire configuration or if we're going to do a video for each tab.
for each tab. But motors too, you got to make sure you go through the motors tab. Jonas has OMP Jonas is a very, very good video explaining a lot of this stuff from the after he picks up basically after the creation of the model, right? So make sure to watch that, and thank you guys for watching. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, have fun.